everybody. Thanks so much for coming along here. If you were looking for the Tilden Nature Area Jewel Lake Study, Restoration of Public Access Feasibility for Wildcat Creek's Jewel Lake Reach Public Workshop, you are in the right place. Thanks a lot for coming along. Just give you a reminder, we are recording. Just make sure everybody knows that we're recording this for posterity and for the use, of course. Welcome, everybody. We have a couple more folks waiting to come in. We can go just about get ourselves started here. There we go. Jerry. And all kinds of folks. That's great. Well, thanks, everybody, for coming along. My name is Mike Moran. We're going to go through some introductions here in just a moment, as soon as we have a couple other folks filtering on in. And again, you are in the right place if you're at the Jewel Lake Workshop. Great. All right. Well, thanks, everybody, for coming along. We'll go ahead and get ourselves begun. As more folks come in, they could join us. Again, thanks for joining us at the Restoration of Public Access Feasibility for Wildcat Creek's Jewel Lake Reach Public Workshop number 2. This is our second one. My name is Mike Moran. I am the Regional Interpretive and Recreation Services Manager for the Northwest region of East Bay Regional Park District, the longest title in the district. And that region includes Tilden Nature Area, Jewel Lake, and the Wildcat Creek watershed. And I would like to acknowledge that Tilden Nature Area, Jewel Lake, and the entire Wildcat Creek watershed are on the ancestral homelands of the Huchiyun people who have and continue to thrive in their growing and vital culture in the East Bay and beyond. As I mentioned, this is the second meeting to help guide and define our next steps in the stewardship and care of Jewel Lake, the area of Wildcat Creek watershed. And tonight we'll focus on providing some context for the project to get a clearer picture of the watershed processes at play that define and impact any proposed project. And then we will present 2 concepts that our board executive committee has forwarded for consideration on how best to steward the Jewel Lake project area into the future. And we will also discuss next steps, and then it's on to your questions. Presentations tonight, they'll take about 30 to 45 minutes, and that'll leave the remainder for public comments and questions and discussion. And we plan to finish up right around 8 o'clock and bid everybody a fond farewell at that time. If you would prefer to submit your questions or comments in Spanish, will you please contact John Holder? His email is at the bottom of the screen. You can see there, jholder@ebparks.org. Again, jholder@ebparks.org. Okay, great. In just a moment, Amanda, will we be conducting that early Zoom survey?
Yes, I can go ahead and start that now if you'd like.
That's great. Thanks so much. Well, in just a moment, you'll see a series of questions just pop up on your screen, and you can use your cursor to provide your answers. And we really appreciate your feedback throughout the process. And this is a great way to get started. And again, please, a reminder that we are indeed recording the meeting. And we want to capture all questions and comments and stuff. So the chat will be recorded too. We'll leave the poll up for a couple of minutes to ensure you have plenty of time to answer. And a little later on tonight, we'll have another Zoom survey. And that'll be available on the Jewel Lake page as well, the district's website, ebparks.org. These surveys are up for 2 weeks. So please feel free to fill it out at your leisure. And you could spread the word so we get a really robust bunch of public input. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and take care of some housekeeping first. We'll get going on some Zoom basics, something I'm sure a lot of you folks are much more acquainted with than I, and that we would have loved to have had these meetings, these workshops in person. We're thankful that Zoom's around so that indeed does allow some folks to get involved who otherwise would not be able to. And for review, and for folks less familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, you'll find a video button shaped like a camera and an audio button shaped like a microphone. And to increase the quality of the program stream, we kindly request that during most of the presentation, you turn those functions off, and you do that by clicking on them and keeping the diagonal red line through them throughout the presentations. For folks who are phoning in, you can use your phone and press *9 to raise and lower your hand, *6 to mute or unmute yourself. And that gives us to the best way to comment or ask a question during the presentation is by using the chat box at the bottom in the middle of the screen. You can see that now it's got a highlighted red 1 there. If you click on that box, you can type in your question or your comment, and we'll have staff monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation tonight, and they'll be able to answer your questions perhaps in the chat or maybe present it later in the program during our question and answer period. Once again, we are indeed being recorded. We want to make sure everybody knows that, and we want to know that your questions and comments will be saved. Again, this is not your only chance to provide feedback. You'll be able to provide questions and comments and learn in future meetings by linking to the project page at ebparks.org. And we'll have that up at the end of the presentation. And thanks to everybody who has already provided invaluable input regarding Jewel Lake, not just recently, but over the years. We look forward to a lot of robust input to make this the best project we can going forward. Again, my name is Mike Moran. I'm the Interpretive and Recreation Services Regional Manager for the Northwest region. And I'm really thrilled to be here with everybody tonight and part of this presentation because I've had many wonderful experiences in this project area through my many years in East Bay. And we also have our staff and consultant team on tonight to help answer questions and provide information, and they will introduce themselves as they appear. But I would like to introduce Amanda Sanders. Amanda is our Senior Administrative Specialist in Planning and Trails and GIS Unit. Amanda, can you give us a wave? Say hi.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Amanda Sanders. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, go ahead and send them to me in the chat. Again, it's Amanda Sanders, and we'll get to the answers later on. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Amanda. And I'd also like to introduce the project lead, Scott Stoller. Scott's a civil engineer with our Restorations Project Unit, and he will be presenting the project concepts this evening. Scott?
Thanks, Mike. I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to speaking more a little bit later.
That's great. Great. Thank you. We got, wow, 57% of the poll's been answered already. Thanks for your participation, folks. We'll review this in just a moment, but I'm really pleased and honored to introduce Elizabeth Eccles, a member of the East Bay Regional Park District Board of Directors representing Ward 1, where this project happens to occur. Director Eccles, would you like to say some words?
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome, everyone. As you just heard, my name is Elizabeth Eccles, board member for Ward 1, which is the communities and parkland in Northern Alameda County and Western Contra Costa County, including, of course, Jewel Lake. I want to thank all of you for participating in tonight's second public workshop to review 2 proposed concepts for the future of Jewel Lake. Jewel Lake is a special place. Many of us have been creating memories there for decades, enjoying the wildlife and surrounding trails. The lake was originally created to store drinking water approximately 100 years ago. Tonight's meeting builds on the work Park District staff presented last October. Many of you were at this workshop, which described 4 possible concepts for the future of Jewel Lake. Since that time, with additional analysis and your input, the Park District has advanced 2 concepts that best meet the project goals. And tonight we want to hear from you to get your input on these concepts. Your views are very important to us to help the Park District find the right solution to revitalize this area of the watershed in a way that promotes both recreational value and ecological health. And now I'll turn it back over to Mike Moran to get us started. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Director Eccles. We're going to go ahead and end the poll in just a minute. Amanda, will we be posting up the results of that poll?
Yes, once I close it, I can share the results. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now.
Let's do that. Thanks so much. Folks, these polls they're really helpful in helping us determine the best ways to reach out to people and make sure they're connected with the parks and what are going on there. So we really appreciate your answers here. Looks like
It's shared, and if you, as you go through it, just scroll down and you'll be able to see all the answers.
Okay, so these are all our results. That's great. So it looks like our district website was not a big mover for this one. It seems like a lot of folks got direct email from the district, so that's great to hear. If you ever find yourself on the district website, it's been redone, little plug there. It's beautiful, visually beautiful, and gives you tons of information, and we will be referring to that for information on the project as we go forward. Good. And it looks like a lot of you, like 8 of you attended the workshop back in October. Thanks for coming back. That's great. And I'm really happy to see that we have a lot of folks that this is their first workshop for this particular project. So that's great. And those of you folks who were here, most of you did the survey last time. The surveys, again, are really helpful. I can't stress enough how we get such valuable information from the public on how to best go forward with these projects. And where are folks from? All over the place, which is wonderful. It shows you the regional significance of this spot. I know that Berkeley, Kensington, El Cerrito, that's right there in your backyard. It's a place that's near and dear to you. But we have folks that are from other parts, even outside of Alameda or Contra Costa County, that are curious about what's happening here and connected to this park in such a way. And we have a nice age range. We have noticed that Sarah Federley is our supervising naturalist at Tilden Nature Area. And Sarah's probably more aware than anybody of the vast variety of ages that come down to use the park and really relish this place.
Mike, could I interrupt for just one moment?
Please. Yeah.
I just wanted to let you know that some people aren't able to see the sharing of the results. So I apologize for that. Sometimes there's some little hiccups with Zoom, but we will have these results available later. Also, if you weren't able to vote in the welcome poll, there will be a SurveyMonkey option available to you after the meeting, and all of those results will also be taken into account. So just wanted to mention those 2 things.
That's great. Thanks, Amanda. And that's a really good reminder, folks. If anything seems to be glitching on your end, please use the chat so we can clarify and help out as much as we possibly can. As we go through the questions here, we're curious who folks travel with when they head on down to Jewel Lake. And it's a pretty good mix of people that go alone, go with their spouse, go with their friends, go with their kids, as I did for so many years, grandchildren and parents. And the activities, there's a lot to do in this area. Oh my gosh, 19 out of 20 respondents are hikers. It's a great place for bird watching. Sarah, they're going to the EEC, the Environmental Education Center, a little farm, picnicking. That's great. It just gives us a really good idea of how people are valuing this place presently. And then Amanda, I can take that down. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and X out of that. Look at that. Okay. Scott, are we able to share the screen?
Yes, just give me a moment here.
Just 1 second, folks. We'll bring that up. And again, folks, use the chat for any questions or comments. And Amanda will be monitoring that, and we will answer those in real time as much as we can, and then maybe a little later on in the presentation. And if your questions aren't answered, do know that they will be kept there and they'll be part of the meeting record. We will answer those questions, and that will also be available for folks to look at on the website. We're just waiting for that share to come up. We have somebody, I think we have Solwazi Allah in the waiting room. Get you in here. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience, folks. We'll bring that presentation right on up. And for those of you folks who have who were part of the October presentation, some of this will be a review. We want to make sure everybody has a common understanding of some of the process and some of the thoughts that brought us to this place. And then you will get a much more in-depth discussion of the 2 concepts that the Board of Directors Executive Committee has pushed forward. Great. And for all you folks that just entered, thanks very much for joining our meeting in the Tilden Nature Area Jewel Lake study. My name is Mike Moran. an interpretive and recreation services manager for the Northwest region. And just a reminder for everybody that we are recording this. Great. All right. So Jewel Lake Study Area, I was just there the other day, folks, and that dried up lake had turned into a puddle just like that again. We'll go through the agenda. Tonight, we're going to review the study, the purpose of it, the timeline, where we are in our project timeline. We'll review input from the public outreach that we've had, the meeting back in October, and our previous board executive committee meeting, update you on the project analysis and what our next steps are going to be. And then we're looking forward to our discussion. Next slide, please, Scott. And looking back gives us a good sense of trajectory, what brought us here to today. National Park Service, 1916 is when it was founded. State Parks followed up in 1927, and East Bay Regional Parks followed shortly thereafter in 1934. We were really we were a leader in this national groundswell because of great public vision, great public support, and involvement. And the more we consider our history, the clearer it becomes that this was really a bold thing. This was a new and different way to look at, to value, to connect with what surrounds us, and that its importance and impact would only increase in the years to come is really the gift of the East Bay Regional Park District that we enjoy today. That's our legacy. And as we are reimagining this renaturalized place down in Tilden Nature Area, how that will be used and valued into the next century. Whichever direction we go, it will indeed be part of our legacy and how people will connect with their parks in the future. It's very similar to the experience of the Park District in 1934. Next slide, please, Scott. The purpose of the study, the purpose of this study is to really evaluate the feasibility and trade-offs of the different concepts. And the purposes can be broken down into two buckets on each side of that line. The two goals that are common to every district project, and they directly address and highlight the district's mission, enhancing natural processes and maintaining this area as a treasured public destination. As we start over on the right side with the maintaining the public destination, that level of public access, it's one of the goals of this project. Jewel Lake is a big access point. We want to maintain that level and maintain it as a destination, not just as an access point. And also maintaining the lake as open water is one of the proposed goals of the project. We go to the left side in enhancing the natural processes and habitats, enhancing native species habitat. But if we look at the next two, provide fish habitat and salmonid passage. So salmonids being things like any salmon, the ocean-going rainbow trout that come up, migrate up and down the creek historically, and prevent sediment accumulation in the lake and in certain areas throughout the watershed. This is the high-quality fish habitat is really a priority at this site. The existing conditions prevent fish passage and sediment continuity. And continuity is just that natural flow and distribution of sediment throughout the watershed. Fish passage and sediment continuity have benefits outside of the project reach. And the other goals here can be met in other ways nearby within the project reach and just outside. But these target native fish can only live in the creek. And the Wildcat Creek watershed is an important resource for not just the East Bay, but the entire region, as it provides a potential for a steelhead run, those ocean-going rainbow trout we spoke of. Next slide, please, Scott. In our timeline, where are we? We're in the yellow box right now over at workshop number 2, highlighted in red. We kicked off the project at the end of 2020, and we started off with 4 different concepts that we evaluated, including last year's public workshop and input from the board and other members of the public. And after further review, we will bring a recommendation forward to the board executive committee, and we will host a 3rd public workshop and proceed under board direction And we look forward to your thoughts tonight on the concept development to date, and again, as we go forward. Thanks. Next slide, please, Scott. So for a little bit of review, those of you folks who were here back in October, this might look familiar to you, but Jewel Lake history, just taking us back 100 years, we understand that Jewel Lake was purpose-built as a municipal water source. And that was before East Bay Regional Park District had begun. So the nature of the watershed silt and sediment made the water difficult to use for a municipal water source. So the lake ended up becoming this storied and treasured part of one of our earliest regional parks. And that same enthusiastic sedimentation that kept it from becoming a municipal water source, it called for dredging of the lake in 1967 and again in 1991. Next slide, please, Scott. The next few slides, again, are going to be a review from our October meeting, but this is really to get that context, that common understanding. We hear the term watershed management and watershed scale management quite a bit, and that's good. That's good. It shows that these advances in ecosystem understanding and management that take us away from a single site management in a vacuum. And we look at the project, that site, within its situation or its place in the watershed. So when we manage for Jewel Lake, we're managing for Alvarado, we're managing for Richmond, for San Pablo, for the Bay. Watersheds are dynamic systems. They're constantly changing by the very processes that make them so rich, and in which these organisms, from trees to invertebrates, cultures, individuals, have sustained and thrived over hundreds and thousands of years. And we often think of water as the single most important component of a watershed. And it is, of course it is, but it's what the water does to and for the entire watershed that we manage for. As we see this picture, you can see that the highlighted pink here is Wildcat Creek from its headwaters in the East Bay Crest all the way through Tilden and Wildcat Park, all the way down to the bayfront through Richmond, San Pablo, and North Richmond and such. The darker blue are creeks and flow through the East Bay, and the lighter blue are undergrounded sections and drainages and such. All right, thanks, Scott. Could you, next slide, please? Now we're gonna be here for a couple minutes, folks. Though very complex and very intertwined, watershed processes rely on some really basic foundational physical realities that are shared by all rivers, all creeks, all streams. And for each waterway, there are three zones. There's a zone of erosion, the zone of transportation, and the zone of deposition. And the foundation of good, sound watershed-wide management is knowing where these zones are so we can manage within those enriching processes. We'll start with the zone of erosion. That's up high in the watershed, our East Bay Crest. And the water, and that be fog, drip, drizzle, the great torrential downpour we had last night that was so exciting, even rare snow. When it comes out of the sky, it comes out clean. There's not much dirt in it. It's like clean water. But when it hits the ground and runs off, gravity is energizing it to run downhill. And that water uses that downhill run of energy to pick up the riches, the wealth of the watershed, the soil, the leaves, the debris, the bugs, the decomposing animals, all that, and it distributes them downstream. This is called hungry water. This is water that hits the ground empty and has an appetite created by that gravitational energy. As that load of water moves out of the steeps of the upper watershed, its route flattens out a wee bit, and it slows down and no longer has the power to erode. It has enough energy to carry or transport the riches it has eaten upstream, but not enough to erode anymore. And this is called the zone of transportation. And as we move further down the watershed and the water enters the lower reaches, it's lost most of its energy. It slows down, no longer carry the sediment it's picked up along its way. So it just dumps along the lower stretches of the creek and into the bay. And this is the zone of deposition. This is an incredibly rich area where all those treasures of the watershed posited. This is where we find wetlands. This is where we find deltas. Now, these zones are net effect areas. The overall effect in the zone of erosion is erosion. But within that zone, transportation and deposition occur. And the same thing for the other two zones. This enhances this watershed-wide distribution of the watershed wealth, that sediment. And if watersheds were a one-way system, only sending nutrients downstream without any regeneration, they would quickly become sterile. But with fish like Wildcat Creek's historic runs of steelhead and other organisms transporting nutrients back upstream, they are cycled back onto the watershed. Even fog and wind transport these nutrients gathered off the bay, and they redistribute them to the watershed. All right, next slide, please, Scott. Jewel Lake, the construction of the Jewel Lake Dam interrupted these watershed-wide processes. Jewel Lake traps sediment, the riches of the watershed, and the dam blocks fish, including rainbow trout, to passage to 2 miles of high-quality, resilient habitat upstream. Next slide, please, Scott. So we've got an opportunity to restore some natural processes. Jewel Lake is now a zone of deposition, an artificial zone of deposition. The willows, the alders, the cattails, cottonwoods, they thrive on the surface, and they quickly cover what used to be lake. The nutrients are buried, they're unavailable to downstream reaches of the creek. And very importantly, you can see my cursor here on that left picture. The water that flows out of the lake over the dam, having dumped its sediment load, is now hungry water again. And it erodes the banks and stream bed down below, turning it into a zone of erosion. Well, so what? Isn't that just natural, like the upper watershed? Yes, it is. The process is, but the hungry water that was distributed widely, dispersed across and gathering riches from the entire upper watershed, you can think of it as like many tiny little appetites, is now concentrated into a thin stream channel. One powerfully erosive, large appetite eroding to bedrock, washing out nutrients, even making downhill slopes less stable. And you can see the picture on the right, undercutting the spillway. Now, there is currently a sedimentation basin just upstream of the lake near the Little Farm. And both the concepts presented tonight would direct that sediment downstream of the project site. And that provides that sediment continuity we spoke of. And that helps passively restore creek reaches below the current dam that have been eroded by hungry water. And also above Jewel Lake, when we think about the entire watershed, we're really fortunate that that watershed is relatively undeveloped, not completely, but relatively undeveloped, and that the natural cycles of hydrology and watershed processes are largely intact. However, we're aware of several sources of really focused runoff from surrounding development, houses, streets, and such, that cause excess erosion above what we consider the normal threshold in a system like this for those areas. And the district does indeed have a program in place to identify and remedy these erosion hotspots to, again, provide those natural processes, those watershed processes of sediment continuity, and that sustainability in these watershed processes. Thanks. Next slide, please, Scott. This project provides an opportunity to sustainably reconnect these enriching watershed-wide processes, ecological, recreational, interpretive, accessible, inclusive processes. And the opportunity just happens to lie in the very area that for generations, since time immemorial, enriched profound personal human connections to what we now call Tilden Nature Area. It's a signature East Bay experience for countless people from generation to generation. And it has been for my boys and me on our many magical visits there. My boys who just turned 18 and 21 last summer. So I've had that long-term, lucky, magnificently fortunate connection to this place, which makes me really excited about its future. Scott will now present two concepts that embrace these processes and the community's deeply held values of the place to manage the watershed resiliently and sustainably into the future. Scott?
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to start out by just orienting everybody to our study site and Jewel Lake, which I'm sure pretty much everybody is very familiar with. But what you see here is a map showing Jewel Lake within our study area in that box toward the left. Wildcat Creek, of course, runs through the site from right to left. We have the Environmental Education Center off to the right to help orient people as well. And so really what I'm going to do is describe our concepts 3 and 4, which were presented in the last public workshop, but we'll provide a little bit more context and look at a few different angles to some of the benefits and drawbacks of each of those concepts. So folks might recall, this is concept 3, which is noted as restoring Wildcat Creek and removing the dam and the lake. The other thing I want to provide context with is on the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of numbers. That is just bringing forward our construction cost estimate, which is, of course, at a conceptual level. You'll notice the 3 different colored bars there. The bottom is the design cost. That middle green is the estimated construction cost. And then the top bar is the operation and maintenance costs, kind of long-term maintenance costs. And then above that is the cost estimate range for all the different phases of the project from design through construction and long-term maintenance. But concept 3 really represents the full restoration of Wildcat Creek within the context of this reach. And so really the dam would be removed and all the sediment kind of within the project area that has accumulated over time would be excavated and off-hauled. And then the material that has deposited upstream of the project reach would be stabilized in place. And that's the same for both concept 3 and 4. You'll notice that the trail that used to go, or that goes over the dam now, that's a dashed line that crosses the creek toward the middle of the project site. That would no longer be present, but what we're looking to do is to add a few different public access elements, including a new boardwalk and bridge, and then an additional trail downstream and a bridge crossing there. And what this concept really emphasizes is that restoring natural habitats for critical species recovery and removing dams that do not support societal needs are a priority. And by societal needs, what I'm talking about, again, alluding to purpose-built dams and reservoirs for water supply and irrigation. And an investment of this nature really reflects an interest to minimize our long-term maintenance liabilities. This slide shows cross sections through concept 3. And if you look over to the right, there's a small key map. There's a cross section A shown, which is the downstream cross section, which is the cross section that's above on the page, and cross section B, which is shown further upstream. And both of those cross sections face downstream. And so you can imagine yourself standing in the creek, looking downstream. The left bank is on the left-hand side and the right bank is on the right-hand side. And what you'll notice in this scenario is that under concept 3, because we're removing the lake and restoring the creek channel, there is kind of a wide, low floodplain associated with the creek in this concept. Concept 4 is called where we would create a bypass channel and modify the existing lake. And again, the cost estimate, similar to concept 3, is shown on the left-hand side. This concept preserves Jewel Lake and constructs a naturalized bypass stream around Jewel Lake. The shape changes a bit, but the overall size is very similar to what is there today. The lake depth as shown would be similar to what was done, what was excavated in previous dredging. So it's about 12 feet deep. And really what's shown here is a concept. And so some of the details in terms of the final shape or the depth, or maybe the presence of that habitat island, all these things will be worked out in further design stages. Again, similar to concept 3, we would be adjusting some of the trails that go around in the board and adding some boardwalk. And both concept 3 and 4, we really envision maintaining the ability to do nested loop walks, which is really, I think, one of the real attractions of really any trail, but especially this area in particular. And so what you'll notice, I don't think I can point to it on my screen, but there's a new bridge that's going to be put in across Wildcat Creek, and underneath that, or in that same vicinity, would be a diversion structure. And that diversion structure would allow water into Jewel Lake at certain times of the year and provide flow in Wildcat Creek for the majority of the year. And within that diversion structure, there is several components that I'll go into in the next slide. But really, one of the elements is to provide a fish screen. And so that's one of the things that the environmental agencies would require, is to actually keep fish from entering Jewel Lake. And I'll get into that a little bit later as well. There's several reasons why we wouldn't actually want the rainbow trout to enter Jewel Lake itself. But really, this concept emphasizes that both native fish passage requirements and recreational and aesthetic value of the lake are important. And investing in this concept really demonstrates our commitment to the long-term operations and maintenance that would be required. The cross sections for this concept are cut or are shown in the same exact locations as concept 3. And you'll notice the upper cross section is very similar to concept 3, because that is just immediately downstream of the existing dam, where Wildcat Creek is in a relatively natural state today. The lower cross section shows both the creek on the left and the lake on the right. And so it just really shows that, we're making an effort to fit both of these elements within our existing project area. So this slide and the next slide look a lot more closely at the diversion structure. And the purpose of all these different elements, they all have a function, and the flow control within the diversion structure allows water to go into the lake at times and allows us to keep water again in the creek the majority of the year. The fish screen that is kind of sandwiched in the middle there helps to keep the fish out of the lake. And the debris rack, which is closest to the creek, helps to keep that whole bypass structure from clogging. And as I mentioned earlier, the environmental regulatory agencies would require this fish screen to be in place to keep fish out of the lake. For one reason is to prevent fish stranding, but probably more importantly is that these perennial open water bodies, which Jewel Lake aspires to be and would be again under this scenario, actually provide habitat for predatory invasive species such as bullfrog that eat young rainbow trout. And so if the fish were allowed to get into the lake, then the lake would become a sink essentially, or a feeding pond for the frogs. This next slide looks at what the components of the diversion structure would be. So again, the debris rack on the left, really functions to keep logs out of the structure, and it's an area where branches and logs do get caught, and also sediment deposits. And so some of the maintenance activities would be to clear both sediment and vegetation from that area. That middle photo shows a fish screen, and so that would be keeping the function to keep fish from entering the lake. And during operations, there is a mechanical brush that would need to be employed to help keep that screen from fouling. Then on the right, you see an example of a flow control device that would need to be maintained and operated manually to allow water into the lake during certain times to maintain the lake water level and also water quality. I'm going to hand it back over to Mike, and he'll touch on just a couple more items.
Great. Thanks, Scott. So destination, as you recall, that was one of the goals that we had in one of our earlier slides. And this connection, this sense of history and the destination of Tilden Nature Area, the sense of place, it's really informed the project throughout the entire process. And both the concepts presented today have destination as part of the DNA of that project. And as we reimagine how we're going to connect with and value that sense of place, we want to ensure that the values that the place holds for the community remain at Tilden Nature Area. The project team is working with the Tilden Nature Area staff who know this place so well to capture that. And a key component, as Scott mentioned a little while ago, it seems simple, but it is profoundly important, and that's the loop trail opportunities. Using familiar, well-loved existing trails and the addition of bridges, new trails, wayside places, other elements that provide that sense of place and continue that important destination value of the loop, so that many folks who've come here over time can continue with that and continue enjoying that very same experience, regardless of the concept moving forward. Next slide, please, Scott. Great. We're going to review just a little bit of how we got here. We had a public meeting back in October. Some of you folks attended that. Thank you very much. And we did find from that meeting support for the two concepts that Scott has presented here. We also got a sense of urgency for action in the area. We had a similar Zoom survey as we did tonight. We had 42 respondents to that survey. Next slide, please, Scott. Very interesting results of that. And you can see the green shows support or agree with the statement. And you can see at the top, it maintains and provides that sense of destinations we talked so much about. And we had good, strong support for that. But if you look at the next two, these were the highlighted goals that we showed in our goals slide of enhancing habitat for native species and prioritizing fish and salmon passage. And those had overwhelming support. Focusing on restoring the historic Wildcat Creek also had very strong support. We were a bit surprised by the moderate support that folks had for the project to provide an open water lake area. Next slide, please, Scott. We know that those were not the only parts of the input here, and Scott's going to continue on with other input that we have.
Thanks, Mike. So most of our projects are multi-objective, meaning that we have multiple goals for our projects. As Mike shared earlier, we had 6 stated goals for this project. And sometimes some of those goals are in conflict. And one of the things that we need to do is to prioritize certain goals at a specific project site. And so one of the things that we do, especially in a project like this, is rely on experts, and in this case, our project biologists, to help guide what the priority species would be at any given place. And because Wildcat Creek is it's a very long creek watershed. The creek runs about 13 miles, and most of that is above ground. There's very few areas that are culverted downstream in the cities of Richmond and San Pablo. And because of that, it really provides an excellent habitat potentially for rainbow trout and steelhead. And so this project, though there are several other native species that use Jewel Lake, for this project, rainbow trout really rose to the top as wanting to make the best possible habitat here as possible. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, without a fish screen, the lake would become a net detriment for rainbow trout habitat, and so that's one of the reasons why this concept 4 would include that. So the other things that I wanted to mention in relation to this is that some of the species that use the lake now, including the western pond turtle and red-legged frog and newts, they all do very well in riparian corridors as well as open water lakes. And there are some bird species in particular that rely more on this open water. And so one of the things that, looking at this site in a regional context is understanding that there are other open water areas, lakes nearby, and that within the lands that the park district manages, the open water is not a limiting habitat, but intact riparian corridors are. And so that's really why the focus of this project is a little bit more heavy on providing this as optimal or as good of habitat for trout as we can. And one of the things to note is, as you might have noticed for concepts 3 and 4, the boardwalk is left intact and actually expanded in both of those concepts. And so the high quality birding habitat along the boardwalk would remain undisturbed. This next slide is a continuation and a deepening of a conversation that we started during the first public workshop. At that workshop, we looked at all 4 of our concepts in relation to our project goals. And both concepts 3 and 4 met our project goals quite well, which is why we're taking this deeper dive and looking at some of the potential trade-offs and the strengths and weaknesses of each of these concepts. And so those headings, the restore Wildcat Creek / remove dam and lake, that's our concept 3. And on the right is the create the bypass channel and modify the lake, our concept 4. And on the left are some of the key elements that we see as differentiators between these concepts to help us understand, again, what those trade-offs might be. And so as we look at rainbow trout habitat specifically, we see, because the concept 3 is naturalizing Wildcat Creek, really more or less making a seamless continuity, both upstream and downstream reaches, that becomes really a reliable fish habitat and provides really good fish passage. For concept 4, really the operations and maintenance of that bypass are critical to maintaining fish passage and flow within Wildcat Creek. And so, we look at the reliability element as bringing down the ranking or how consistent that habitat might be. In terms of open water, I think that it's very clear that there is no open water for concept 3 for that restore Wildcat Creek option. And for concept 4, we provide that open water and that aesthetic amenity. In terms of potential for success, again, because the concept 3 is a simpler project and there are numerous successful restoration examples in the Bay Area, we see this as a high potential for success. And by creating that bypass channel and that new infrastructure, it really means that we have to rely on maintenance for that performance. And so it's really something that, when we look at in terms of, reliability, human-made infrastructure is inherently not as reliant or resilient as nature oftentimes. And in terms of operations and maintenance, fully restoring the creek creates a self-sustaining ecosystem and the natural processes are restored. So there's very little in terms of long-term maintenance that is foreseen. And for concept 4, by constructing this new infrastructure, it really adds some complexity to the system, and it would require long-term and daily operations and maintenance. Another element that we're looking at is climate change resiliency. And this is interesting, and it's a little bit complicated to suss out what some differences between these 2 concepts would be. But essentially, when we look at climate change projections, the long-term averages of rainfall and runoff would be similar to what we see today. But there's also expected to be more extended droughts and also higher flows and flash floods and those sorts of things. And so again, natural systems tend to be a little bit more resilient, that they're able to, self-regulate. And then under the concept 4, where we're putting in this infrastructure, again, because it is human-made, it's more susceptible to either sedimentation or perhaps washing out during extreme flows. One other element, just thinking about having the lake in the picture, because water is diverted to the lake, there would be slightly less flow that is in the channel itself. Just to bring things back, I know Mike did a good job bringing us to where we are in the study timeline. Again, we are here at workshop 2, and we're really getting close, I think, to the conclusion of the study. And after getting your input and considering that, along with some of the letters that we've got from different organizations and from regulatory agencies, we'll be approaching the board executive committee and seeking their recommendation, which would go to the full board for consideration. And our hope is to, this year begin design on the preferred concept. So I wanted to thank everybody again for being here today, and to really think that, and understand that we are at an important juncture in the history and management of Jewel Lake and Wildcat Creek. It's important to recognize our place in history and the impact that this decision will have on generations of park goers and wildlife alike. And much like the decision to construct the dam had both positive and negative enduring impacts, it gave us the park district itself and almost 100 years of great memories, but it cut off some of the natural flows within the watershed, keeping the sediment from replenishing these downstream reaches and impacting some of the habitat for fish, but other riparian species as well. So it's really, it's a time for us to reflect and to make a decision that will have long-lasting impacts. We're going to take this moment to move into questions and comments, and Amanda will moderate those. So hopefully you've had a moment during the presentation to type into the chat your comments or questions that Amanda will go through and bring up for discussion. The other thing that Amanda will do is she'll start the second phase of our survey, our poll. And so what we're asking at this point is your direct opinion on both concepts 3 and concept 4, your willingness and your interest in seeing these concepts moving forward into design and implementation. And then you can see on the right, we have the project website that you're welcome to visit at any point. There's a lot of information there from our past work. This video will be posted there and also to YouTube. And then the survey that you're taking tonight will also be posted. You'll see the SurveyMonkey link here. You're welcome to take a picture and share it with folks, but also there's a link on our website, and that'll be live for the next couple of weeks. So just to understand that the survey on SurveyMonkey is the same exact as we're showing tonight. So just kind of keep that in mind, and please only do the survey once. Thank you.
All right. So we're having a little bit of trouble getting that second survey up. We'll get that up as soon as we can. But in the meantime, Amanda, have you been receiving some questions in the chat?
I have, and
thanks so much.
I'm happy to go ahead and start reading them. Just so everybody knows, I'll be starting with the ones I received first. So if I don't get to yours right away, it's because you asked after somebody else did. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one was not actually a question, it was just a statement of appreciation from Karen Johnson, who said that the Jewel Lake Boardwalk is great for baby strollers and wheelchairs, and that she's made very many happy memories made there. All right, and then we have a couple questions from Peter Rauch. The first one is, how does the fish passage fit into the management of Lake Anza? And also, how does the reduction of sediment production fit into the plan?
Then over to Scott, and we also have other folks on staff who might be able to enhance the answer to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start out by letting everybody know that we do actually have several of our biologists within the park district attending today. So I will call on them throughout the evening to answer specific questions. But in terms of how Lake Anza plays into the restoration of this site, it really doesn't. In terms of our thinking and understanding, Lake Anza it's within the watershed, but it has its own function, and it's not been impacted in the way that Jewel Lake has been and continues to be in terms of sedimentation. The second part of the question, if I recall it correctly, was how does the reduced sedimentation impact the project site? Amanda, can you repeat that?
Yes, give me just 1 second here. Let me scroll back up. It was, how does the reduction of sediment production fit into the plan? And this was before we went over the 2 separate plans.
So I'm not sure if I'm clear, but hopefully, Peter, this helps. So the sedimentation basin that is by the Environmental Education Center would no longer be needed because we are routing the sediment. It'll continue downstream, and so really, it's what we're trying to do here is provide that sediment continuity. And I think what Mike had alluded to earlier, and he mentioned, is most of the erosion that occurs within the Wildcat Creek watershed in Tilden is largely undeveloped, which is great because we have these natural processes that take care of themselves, and the soils within this watershed are actually highly erosive naturally, and so really one of the best things about this project is that it almost takes humans kind of get out of the way a little bit and really stop managing the sediment within the watershed so much. But there are some point sources of runoff from Wildcat Canyon Road and some of the development that are in the hills. And so the park district, we monitor those and we, at appropriate times engage in, stabilization efforts there as well.
okay, and let's see, we have another question from Peter. It was, how will the upstream sediment accumulation be stabilized if the dam is removed, shown in concept 3?
Yeah, so both concept 3 and concept 4, when Jewel Lake was constructed, the lake actually extended all the way up to near the Environmental Education Center. And so there's been a lot of sedimentation over the last 100 years. And so within the project site and the project limits, that sediment would be excavated to get to the grades needed to reconstruct the channel within that area. But any of the sediment that has accumulated upstream, that gets stabilized in place. And so there's a series of step pools constructed out of rock that will be needed for the channel grade that we're looking to achieve. And so that naturally stabilizes and would keep that upstream sediment in place.
Okay, the next question is from Laurel Collins, and it says, can more off-channel habitat be created along the constructed channel in concept 3, utilizing the floodplain, including connection to the nature ponds area upstream to the east that is presently cut off by Wildcat Trail Road, to create resting sites and habitat such as appropriately deep ponds that simulate cutoff channels for red-legged frogs?
I think that's a great question. And I think one of the things that we'll be exploring as the project moves into design is some of these options. I think that given the steepness of the channel through this area, we're looking at probably a 3% slope or so. So it's largely a step pool system where it doesn't naturally have a lot of floodplain zones. So within most of the project reach, we're kind of in that condition. But we do see some opportunities, perhaps of adding some wetland features within there, and really guiding some of the other tributaries to create some additional and varied habitats.
Okay, the next is a comment from Peter Rauch. So it says, sense of place, which would then be outfitted with what appears to be more elevated / bridge trail segments, creates noise generating environments, which seems counterproductive to those who seek the quiet and who seek a view of wildlife undisturbed by thundering hiker viewers. And then the next question is from Dawn, and it says, good evening. So this was the survey what assisted the park district in choosing and narrowing the 4 concepts down to 2, or was there other input taken into account for that?
Yeah, I can answer that as well. So public comment, we reached out to local tribes and also other stakeholders, so watershed groups in the area and also the cities and regulators for this area. And so really we took a lot of that input as well as our own analysis. And really there was a strong consensus that both concepts 3 and 4 met our project goals largely and should be considered further. And so that's why we narrowed down our options to both of those.
Hey, Amanda, I'm going to step in real quick if you don't. And folks, I'm just going to go ahead and close this poll up in about a half a minute. If you haven't had a chance to answer those 3 questions, we sure would love your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. The next question is from Laurel Collins. How will you prevent stranding of fish and other aquatic organisms in the constructed channel in concept 4 when water is diverted into Jewel Lake? Is there a potential that the main channel will dry completely when the water is diverted to the pond?
Yeah, thanks for that question too. So really the operations for concept 4, that diversion structure, it's gonna rely largely on adaptive management. And really the goal is to divert the minimum amount of water that we need into the lake to maintain the water level and water quality. Those are really the 2 goals, is to, by the springtime, is to make sure that the lake is full, and that at any point that are priority times of year and priority flows for fish passage, that the priority is to keep water within Wildcat Creek. And so we really see diverting a small amount as possible through the lake. And so it's really going to be a matter of year to year understanding what those management needs are.
Okay. David Edelson questions whether the project can provide reliable fish habitat in the future, given climate change and increasing droughts. How is that being taken into account?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, I think, really why we're doing, both of these concepts have very similar channel geometries and channel lengths and channel slopes. And so really what we're trying to do is to, create a naturalized creek channel. And so, we recognize that even, at times today, or even, last year, Wildcat Creek dried up in many places, and there were, only a few resting pools that persisted throughout the whole year. And so, there are going to be times, and there have been times in the past, where droughts do dry up the flow in Wildcat Creek within Tilden. And so really what this project does is it almost makes it quote unquote invisible as a project, and really renaturalizes it to be in line with the character of the creek reaches both up and downstream of the project site. And so we don't want to be so it won't be any better or worse maybe than those adjacent project reaches.
Okay,
and again, let me just also invite Joe Sullivan, our fisheries program manager and any other biologists, if you feel called, which I encourage because I am not a biologist, you can just unmute yourself and help to provide some context as well.
Sure. If you guys can hear me, thanks, Scott. I think it's very important to realize the trout in Wildcat Creek in the East Bay they evolved to be in droughts and to be in periods of no water in the creek, and that is the essence of what steelhead are. When there's no water in the creek, they go out into the ocean. And then when there's favorable habitats, they can come back up into the creeks and reproduce. And the trout that we see in the East Bay streams are exactly what they're adapted to be able to do. And by not providing that habitat to be available to them through dams and diversions and blocking them from coming back from the ocean, you're not allowing them to be part of the natural processes that they're very well evolved and adapted to handle. And I maybe that answers the question for you, Scott, but that's the situation we're in the East Bay.
Joe, can you introduce yourself and your title, please?
Yes, sorry, thanks, Amanda. So I am Joe Sullivan. I'm the Fisheries Program Manager for the Park District.
Great, thank you. I have a follow-up question from David as well. And this says, how is the existence of Lake Anza just above Jewel Lake affect the watershed restoration possibilities? And is the district considering removing Lake Anza?
Joe, do you want to take that one again?
Yeah, I can try, and then I'll let you go, Scott. We are not considering removing Lake Anza at the moment. We know it provides plenty of recreational opportunities for fishing and hiking and swimming. But upstream of Anza, there's really only maybe a quarter mile of favorable habitat for rainbow trout until you get into the botanical garden. And then above that, you get into the golf course, which doesn't provide any favorable habitat for rainbow trout. So removing Lake Anza at this moment doesn't seem as beneficial as a project such as what we're looking at tonight in Jewel Lake. There's much more stream habitat by allowing them to bypass Jewel Lake or go through it or whatever at this point.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think, between Jewel Lake and Lake Anza, that's about a 2 mile, additional reach or additional length of creek channel that would be open to that migration. So I think that, this project will be beneficial, no matter which concept is chosen.
Okay, I have a statement from Rainbow Rubin. Sending an enthusiastic vote for option 3, restoring natural processes, supporting fish habitat, and choosing a lower cost project with a higher probability of success. Option 3 is the obvious choice to prevent a high cost project that proliferates non-native predatory species and requires maintenance in perpetuity. Your data shows the community's enthusiastic support for rainbow trout habitat and moderate likelihood of success with the lake. How do board members that support the lake justify their rationale? Please choose option 3. Okay, and looks like I have another statement. This one is from David Holtzman, and it reads, I have lived for 12 years in the East Bay and worked as an environmental consultant, worked in Berkeley for Cal/EPA, and most importantly, I love the East Bay Hills and aim to get back up there with friends soon. Between concept 3 and concept 4, it looks like concept 3 does a better job of serving a park district's objectives. Based on the diagrams, I'd say that that option 3 trails and boardwalks look nicer and probably would do a better job of serving visitors with disabilities. The pullouts and views would provide great opportunities for education and give park goers opportunity to see over time how the creek restoration proceeds. Finally, I like fish. Their stream travel always really amazes me. Option 3 includes less maintenance costs than option 4, providing a better chance that the fish will keep coming. My late friend Palma worked for a US EPA and helped preserve vital waterways in the agency's Region 9. I offer these remarks in part as a tribute to her. Okay, next question is from Elizabeth Dodge. And she asks, what is the purpose of the waterfall to prevent fish entry in concept 3?
Yeah, I can address that. It's pretty similar to why we would have a fish screen for concept 4, and that's to prevent fish stranding within that wetland habitat. But there's many ways that we can do that, and so I think that the orientation and how that wetland feature is shown, that'll get developed further during the design process, just as what's shown as concept 4 would likely change somewhat to fit the conditions and further the design development. So it's really to prevent fish from getting up there and getting stranded, essentially.
Okay, next statement is from Karen Johnson. It says, we like the lake, so would prefer option 4. The presentation seems skewed towards option 3. And then I think you might have already addressed this partially, but Charles Honig says, how does the fate of Lake Anza relate to the options?
I think we can skip that one.
Okay.
And Amanda, if I may,
Yes.
who asked that question? That was Charles, you said?
Yes.
Okay, so we did address that, Charles. I'm not sure if you missed that or not, but you could go ahead and send in a question to the website, or feel free to email one of us and we'll be able to provide you with that answer. It's a repeat of one that we provided earlier on. We want to make sure we get that answer to your satisfaction. Thank you.
This is another one that was somewhat talked about. I'm not sure if you want to say any more. It's from Jacob Woodall, and it says, with the current drought, what is the feasibility that both the lake and the lower reaches of the creek can be fed?
Yeah, so again, this is Scott. I'll answer by saying the volume of the lake is relatively small compared to the volume of water that passes through Wildcat Creek in any given storm even. And so, in terms of ensuring that the lake does get water under concept 4, I think that we could be relatively confident that on the majority of years in the springtime, the lake would be full. But there's always evaporation that happens during the dry season, and so that lake level in extreme droughts would likely drop. But again, what we're showing under concept 4 is preventing that sedimentation of the lake. And so in that ideal situation, the lake depth stays relatively constant for many decades. And so there would be some buffer in terms of if there was a few feet of evaporation during the dry season, then the water level would drop, but the lake itself likely would not go dry itself.
Okay, give me just a second here to get back up to the next question. All right, 2 questions from Pam Velos. First one is, both concepts keep the current boardwalk, correct? And the second question is, what happened to the pools that were built recently?
Yes, so both concepts do keep the boardwalk and actually expand them moderately. And the educational ponds that were constructed a few years ago are still there and operational and look great. I was there just the other day, and there was water in two of them, and a third one was more of a wetland at this point, because that's what they do. Is seasonally they are designed to dry out so that they provide good habitat for red-legged frog and prevent the colonization by bullfrogs. I saw some newts in there, so yeah, I think that that those ponds are very active and have been successful.
Just as an aside, Scott, the ponds do have newts and tree frog larvae in them presently. Thanks.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. Jerry Kent has a question. It says the Tilden LUPD, which is the land use plan, was done in 1988 and provides for dredging of Jewel Lake. Do you plan to do a project CEQA process to cover proposed alternatives?
Yes. The project, as we move forward, will need to undergo CEQA evaluation, and so any, so we would need to be in accordance with the land use plan, and also provide analyses and evaluations for any plans that we develop for this project.
Folks, I'll just jump in just for clarity. I do want people to note that we've been referring to these project as concepts. They haven't gone into the alternative phase, which is more of a legal and definition, a more defined term. So these are still in the concept phase that we're working on. Thanks.
Okay, and another question from Laurel Collins. It says, there are numerous large earth flows on the hillside to the west of the newly proposed channel. These landsides tend to have fairly high rate of creep and sometimes move as large surges. How would you be able to ensure the stability of the diversion structure on the channel to continue to keep it operable in the long term?
Yeah, thank you for that. And so that's one of the challenges, I think, of the project. Our project team is well aware of those, and we do have a geotechnical engineer on staff, or contracted, and so that's one of the roles and one of the things that they're looking at even in this preliminary stage, is the stability of some of those landslides, and looking at ways that we can stabilize and remedy any risks to the project.
Okay. Julie M asks, do the steelhead/rainbow trout have a seasonal run like salmon do? That could be a real attraction and cool ecological phenomenon.
Can we pass this one over to Joe?
Sure.
Yep, here good. And just again, the fisheries manager for the park district, and the answer to that is yes. They steelhead and salmon do have a seasonal run. Salmon run upstream to spawn in suitable habitat in the late summer, early fall, and into the winter even, and then steelhead follow. And if anyone was paying attention to the news, we actually had a very exciting run of salmon this past winter in almost all of our East Bay streams, and including Wildcat Creek. So that gives us even more confidence that these species are well adapted to these very fluctuant climate changes. And when the habitat is suitable, they will come. We just have to give them access. And we are confident that we'll see these species once again in these streams, as long as we allow them to get to the suitable spawning habitat.
Okay, and then Mike Hall sends a statement which says daily maintenance is what the Tilden staff excels at. Open water benefits a range of wildlife. It's way more than a sentimental recreational destination. Lake Anza doesn't meet the need in a similar way. Kudos to all who've been thinking their way to solutions. from a Spawners supporter. And I'm assuming Spawners is a community group of some sort. And let's see. Next question is from Jacob Woodall. It says, Jewel Lake is currently a hotbed for bullfrog activity, both as a sink and a source. By keeping the lake around, the potential to remove this threat to native biodiversity becomes almost impossible, as any removal efforts in the nearby ponds or creek will be rendered useless through dispersal movements. This is important considering that the Tilden Nature Area has had California red-legged frogs in the recent past. How is this being evaluated in weighing the pros and cons of Plan 4?
I'd like to request one of our project biologists to chime in. I don't know, Tammy or somebody else feels the ability to respond.
Hello, thanks for the question, Jacob. Yes, I think in short, option 3, which reduces the open water habitat and keeps the water flowing, would improve conditions for California red-legged frogs. And in this situation, reduce habitat quality for breeding bullfrogs. Bullfrogs generally need warm open water, and option 3 would remove a lot of that habitat. So it would be beneficial in the sense of decreasing habitat quality for invasive species like bullfrogs, and actually also red-eared spiders.
Tammy, you should introduce yourself.
All right, everybody doesn't know me. I'm Tammy Lim. I'm a wildlife biologist with the East Bay Regional Park District. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Tammy. Alex Benedict says, are rainbow trout currently successfully using the available Wildcat Creek habitat? If not, how would the creek be available to them under these concepts?
Again, I think Joe is probably the best suited to answer this question.
I love all the trout questions.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. So we have resident rainbow trout in Wildcat Creek, and those are the same species as steelhead that can migrate out to the ocean and then come back. So there's two different life histories. There's fish that live in the stream, and then when conditions aren't good in the stream, they go out to the ocean and they get bigger. There's a lot more resources in the ocean. They eat more, and then they come back to reproduce. And those are steelhead. But there currently are resident trout, rainbow trout in Wildcat Creek, and those are native. And they utilize the habitat even when the stream goes dry. If you haven't really explored the creek, there are some very deep pools that they'll rely on, and they'll sit in those pools for the summer. Even when the stream is dry and not running, they'll hang out in these nice shaded pools until water starts flowing again, and then they can disperse throughout the stream. So hopefully that answers your question.
And hey, Amanda, I wanted
Sorry,
to
Matt.
do a quick time check or question check, because right now we're at 7:55. And I think that, staff are available to stay a little bit after 8 to help answer questions. But any questions that we're not able to answer, we'll definitely get to, because they're in the chat. And after this, there will be a record of the meeting. And so we'll transcribe all the questions that have been asked so far and the answers, and post those, as well as any questions that maybe if we're not able to get to all of them tonight.
It looks like we have 5 questions left at this
Actually,
point.
Amanda, can I just, sorry to interrupt, but just piggyback on Joe's answer. You made a very good point about how fish go out, and the steelhead will go out to the bay and ocean and actually gather up resources. Those resources are ones that have washed off the creek. We talked earlier on in the presentation about recycling those sources. So they grab those resources, they bring them up as a much larger fish. And if they meet their demise up in the creek, that becomes part of the food chain and all kinds of nutrient cycling. Thanks.
Okay, next question is from Pam Voice. How would the dimension of the lake under concept 4 compare to its existing size now?
Yes. So when the lake is full, as it is currently, the lake under concept 4 would be approximately the same size. Again, the shape would change somewhat to be able to fit both the lake and the creek within the same corridor. And then even looking back to when the lake was dredged previously in 1991 and 1967, the surface area is actually very similar to those times as well.
Okay, Laurel Collins has another question, and we'll do this and then we'll give some results to the poll after that question, or possibly not. Laurel's question is, are the landslides included in the cost analysis of option 3?
I think that in terms of stabilizing the that western bank, I don't know if any assumptions were made when that cost estimate was put together in terms of actively stabilizing that bank. And it likely would be for both concept 3 and 4 that it would be a similar similar work that would need to be done, because that channel itself is cutting through similar material, even though the alignment is a little bit different. But I don't think that those costs were incorporated.
Okay, I'd like to go to one of our call-in users that has their hand raised. So whoever has called in on their phone and has their hand raised, would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, I believe you're talking to me.
Yes.
This is Lori Gray, and I'm wondering who within the park staff I can get with to talk about the accessibility aspects of both of these options. And is there a description of the diagrams, a written description? Since I am blind and I wouldn't be able to access the actual diagrams.
Hey, Lori, this is Mike Moran. Thanks for
Mike.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, man. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Hey, Lori, why don't we connect and with Sarah Federley, supervising natural Tilden Nature Area, and me, and we'll follow up with that. I think I have contact, and I'll connect with you.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks for the great question.
All right.
Okay, I have a question from Mark Wegner. Will the cost of the concepts play an important part in making a decision between the two?
I can give my opinion, and if any of the other staff would like to chime in, they can as well. I think that for the most part, they may weigh as a consideration, but I don't think that they'll be a big factor in the decision itself. A lot of the work that the Park District does when we do restoration projects, or we do projects when we open new parklands, we really seek to find grant resources to help with the costs. And we've been largely very successful doing that. And so one of the things that we do when we put a project together is look at project elements that would be more favorable for granting agencies. And fish passage is a very important restoration action within California. And so projects that incorporate these fish passage elements and kind of put them front and center are usually very competitive for granting agencies, as well as some of our own district funds, of course, have to go into developing some of these projects as well. But we have projects that range from a few $100,000 that get constructed to tens of millions of dollars. So I think that this project, while it is large and it is it's considerable, it's by far not the largest project that we've engaged in and successfully raised funds for.
Great. I only have 2 more questions at this point, so I'll go ahead and get to those. Pam Valois asks, how far from the ocean is Jewel Lake?
Oh boy.
I know that answer. It is 9 miles from the bay. And there was actually a Bay Nature article that was just published in their spring edition that the author basically walked from the headwaters all the way down to the bay and chronicled her journey. It's a really interesting read. And I think that they documented that I think it's about 9 miles from Jewel Lake to the bay, and then all the way to the headwaters is probably to the tippy top near Volmer Peak is probably another 3 miles or 4 miles in that neighborhood. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I was gonna say, Amanda, was the question to the ocean? Did I hear that? Yeah, so from the mouth, it's probably best to do a little Google Maps thing or Google Earth thing, but it's a good question if you might be thinking about distance for migration fish and such. And that the route, although it may be direct on Google Earth, fish take very circuitous routes during their migration. And some might go through Raccoon Strait, some might go around the other side of Angel Island. So it'd be curious to find out why you're asking that question, and we can see if we can provide a more accurate answer for you. Thanks.
Okay, Peter Rauch asks, does concept 4 involve removing the entire earthen dam?
I can take that. It does not require the removal of the entire dam. So the spillway would stay intact and a portion of the dam would stay intact. And then there would be essentially a new berm constructed between the channel and the lake, which would, help impound water within the realigned lake and keep that water from seeping too strongly back into the creek.
Okay, and I have one more comment. This is from Laurel Collins. Says, please note that landside stabilization will be essential for the operation of the diversion structure proposed in option 4. For option 3, stabilization is not that critical to maintain some kind of channel and connection to the downstream. For option 3, landslide stabilization will not be as critical for a channel to naturally adjust and laterally migrate. Seems like the budget would likely be much higher for option 3 to ensure success. And then Dawn says, are you going to save some of the dam pieces? Didn't the WCC build some of the dam / spillway? Oh, and Laurel meant option 4 on the last part. Sorry.
Thank you. In response to the last question, and thank you, Laurel, for that really detailed and very relevant comment. In response to that last question, the dam was actually constructed in 1921, so before the WPA. It was constructed as a water supply reservoir back in the days when we had competing water companies, private water companies, and so. But it is very historic, and it's something that we do want to preserve as much as we can, especially the parts of the spillway for future interpretive purposes. And I think there's probably an opportunity to preserve some of that spillway in place, just because it is right up against the existing trail, and so it's really pushed over to one side of the canyon. So I think that there's a good likelihood that even under concept 3, we would be able to preserve a large portion intact. And then of course, if there were portions that we're pulling out, we do want to preserve as much as we can for interpretive purposes. Mike, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, you covered it, Scott. That's the possibility of being able to keep some of that as interpretive resources. That covers it. That's great. Thanks.
And that is all I have for now.
Okay. I will go ahead and share the results here. Can folks let me know if they can see those? And then Lori, call-in user 2. Again, want to thank you for your question, and I will look forward to your assistance, if we may be so bold, and how best to present the information you're looking for to other folks in the community. Thanks.
Definitely. Thank you.
Sure.
And
are folks seeing the poll results? I'm not sure.
I can see them, but I'm not sure if others can.
Oh, okay.
I see one thumbs up.
Okay, thanks for the thumbs up, folks. So you can see our closing poll, we have the first question is essentially the agree or disagree with concept 3, remove the dam. We have a strongly agree, a good majority of folks agreeing there, and a smaller amount agreeing, that undecided and disagree in the minority here, 20% in the disagree side, disagree or strongly disagree. And concept 4 has mostly strongly disagree and disagree, folks that are undecided, and smaller numbers that either strongly agree or agree. And then the other comments, the questions or concerns, looks like folks have those. I regrettably can't see those questions, comments, or concerns. So if you could please share them in the chat while we're finishing up here, or please go ahead and email us, or go to the district website, ebparks.org/Jewel Lake Study, and add your input. We'd really appreciate it.
And Mike, just so you know, at the end of the meeting, I'll be able to download all of those comments that people wrote in there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I did want to remind everybody that if you didn't get a chance to fill out the surveys earlier, there's a QR code on the screen right now. And you can scan that and go directly to the Survey Monkey poll and complete those surveys there.
And for those folks who would prefer to have questions in Spanish, again, John Holder, jholder@ebparks.org. And we're hoping to have that survey out in Spanish the early part of next week. Thank you. All right. Do we have any other questions or comments, Amanda? Anybody chatting in?
No, that seems to be it.
That's great. Well, folks, I really want to thank everybody for taking the time, interest in this project and the meeting tonight, and in sharing your best thoughts for the future stewarding of this treasured part of East Bay Regional Park District. Any other comments, team? Thanks so much, everybody. We look forward to checking out those polls and to, more comments that you might provide in the weeks. Thanks so much. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks so much. Good night.
Thank you very much, Director Eccles, for leading this
Thank you.
tonight. Sorry.
Thanks for an excellent presentation.
Oh,